2016 is a perfect example of this, and the fact that Doug was almost universally panned as the worst coach of that cycle. He ended up being the best coach by far of that cycle.
Sports Radio 94 WIP, a radio.com sports station.
Hour number 2 on our Monday night get-together here on 94 WIP. Jody Mack sticking around till 2. Lots of Eagle conversation as expected. They did officially hire their new head coach, although it's the worst-kept secret in the Delaware Valley for a couple of days. But we know Nick Sirianni is going to be the guy at the head of the Eagles organization. Or is he? Jeff Lurie and Howie Roseman, the guys who made the decision to give him the big whistle. Was it the right decision? How did they come to it? We'll break that all down with our next guest. He covers the Eagles on a day-in, day-out basis for Sports Illustrated, PhillyVoice.com, and you must listen to his Extending the Play podcast if you're any kind of an Eagle fan. John McMullen joins me here on 94 WIP. Well, Johnny Mac, when I talked to you last week, I said, there's a good chance I'm going to ask you to come on again next week because I think we could get a new head coach of the Eagles. And we did. Within days, the rumors were that it was a done deal. Now it is official. Let's talk about timing first. Once they decided Doug Peterson was gone, the Eagles did jump into the deep end of the pool. They knew where they were behind, and they started interviewing potential new head coaches pretty rapidly. Were you surprised they actually made their decision as quickly as they did?
No, if you see the cycle, I mean, they were actually pretty slow when you compare it to normal teams, and understandably so because they were behind from a standpoint of everyone else in this process looking for coaches. And some of the hottest candidates they were able to get in, some they weren't. Robert Saleh, they got in. Arthur Smith, they were able to interview, but they were really deep in the process and other with other teams, and obviously Sally got the Jets job, Smith got the Falcons job. So those guys were never really in play. And then you started, let's be honest. I mean, at that point, you got to go down the list. And we talked a lot about Josh McDaniels, and I think, the Eagles thought they got through their first round of interviews and thought he was the clear choice, but there's tremendous, when I say tremendous baggage with Josh McDaniels. It's an understatement, and I think it spooked Jeffrey Lurie. I think Howie Roseman was very comfortable with him, but ultimately I think Jeffrey was going to keep going until he found somebody that he liked better than Josh McDaniels. And they found that with Nick Sirianni, and that's how we got here.
So you're suggesting this is, I'm going to ask you to put a percentage on it, and I don't know if you can or if it's even fair. If Howie and Jeffrey are the two guys who are, and I don't think it's a 50-50 split right down the middle. I certainly think the owner's got a little bit more say. But you believe this was a 85% Jeffrey hire, a 90% Jeffrey hire, a 60% Jeffrey hire, that was kind of the owner who's certainly got last vote coming down and deciding this was his guy. What would you say the percentage of between he and Howie deciding, Sirianni's the guy? Breaking out was.
Well, I will say this. I don't know if it's a percentage, but I think if it were up to Howie, Josh McDaniels would be the coach of this team. Okay. And I think this is not going to make fans happy. And I think a lot of ways, Jeffrey Lurie was correct. And in a lot of ways, he probably saved Howie Roseman again by going in a different direction, because when you get in these situations, I think everybody puts their best foot forward. I think everybody talks a good game. People can just look at their own lives and think about interviews they've had for jobs. You try to put your best foot forward. And Josh and Howie both said they could work together. It wouldn't be an issue. And I think Jeffrey came to the conclusion that at some point, those two in the same building would clash. And I think he's right. I think he's 100% right. I've been hard on Jeffrey Lurie throughout this process. But for that, I think he was 100% correct, and it would have blown up. So in a lot of ways, I think he saved Howie Roseman.
Now, before we get back to Sirianni, and that is the main thing we were talking about, but the McDaniels thing is very interesting, that Howie came down as pro-McDaniels as he did. When he was in Denver, he had a lot of say in player personnel, and it wasn't all right. He had a president above him, but president wasn't going to tell him no. It didn't really work all that well. I know he didn't win, and I don't know any great moves that he made or evaluations that he had, so I don't know what you would base his ability to do that job other than Denver once thought that he could. But chances are he's going to come in here and at least want strong coach say over the roster and the moves and the draft and the like. We've been led to believe that Howie is the guy, other than when things go bad, Howie finds other people to suggest they were involved in the process. But since Howie got the throne back from Chip Kelly, it's kind of been his player personnel department to run. Why do you think Howie wanted Josh McDaniels? Did he want someone else to be able to share the blame with if things went badly going forward when it came to decisions on personnel?
No, I think it came down to he thought it was the best football coach available. He had a lot of respect for his ability as an offensive coach. And I think a lot of people in this league, you bring up Denver, I mean, he was a disaster. There's no other way to describe it. From day one, he was 33 years old. To me, that was a Broncos mistake. The Eagles felt his maturity learned from being sort of overbearing when he was back then. Now, the problem with that is then he did what he did with Indianapolis, which I think is the far bigger issue because that was so unprofessional.
Yep.
So that part of it, I think, was a bigger issue from Jeffrey's standpoint. As far as Howie, I mean, look, you're seeing it now. Nick Sirianni has been given ultimately every coach he's wanted, except with the exception of Jeff Stoutland, who they talked him into. And we still have positions to fill, and we'll see how that shakes out. But, you know, offensive coordinator is Nick's choice. Defensive coordinator is Nick's choice. Josh would have brought in his own coaches. So now it's clear that the Eagles only had a problem with Doug Peterson and didn't think he was capable of picking coaches. It's the only way you can look at it.
Right, because if they're going to give a first-time coach the ability to make these selections, you wouldn't let a Super Bowl winning coach make certain coaching selections. Yeah, there was a pretty
amazing.
Right. That's a unforeseen deep divide between the powers that be with the Eagles and the former power to be with Doug Peterson. Let me ask you about the coaching staff and the makeup. Yes, he's already got his DC in place coming with him from Indianapolis. Offensive coordinator, now it's not official yet, but rumors are pretty heavy as to who's going to be taking over that position. You got a handicapping on Sirianni and the choices he's made so far for putting together his new Eagle staff, good, bad, or indifferent?
Well, I mean, I always laugh at, 2016 is a perfect example of this, and the fact that Doug was almost universally panned as the worst coach of that cycle. He ended up being the best coach by far of that cycle. So I think grades of hirings are kind of useless. I would say I'm a little bit concerned about the lack of experience. I mean, Jonathan Gannon will be a first-time defensive coordinator under a rookie head coach. Shane Steichen had, basically a year and change. He was the interim offensive coordinator with the Chargers, then got the full-time gig for 1 year under an offensive head coach. So nobody's ever called plays. And then I think if you look at the league as a whole, Jody, and you see the way it's been going with some of these young coaches, and it started with Sean McVay. They gave him Wade Phillips. If you look at, Matt LaFleur on Championship Sunday, they gave him Mike Pettin, who was the head coach in Cleveland. He inherited him. Matt Nagy had Vic Fangio. Even Doug, not as young, but Doug was given Jim Schwartz. I would be concerned about the lack of experience and the lack of a sounding board in one of those three important positions. I mean, there's a lot of hurdles with this job, and it starts with, obviously, the quarterback controversy. There's personnel issues. There might be a divide in the locker room because of the way they treated Deuce Staley in the Rooney Rule and things like that. I mean, this guy's got a lot of hurdles to deal with, and his sounding boards are basically just as inexperienced as he is.
John McMullen from SIPhillyVoice.com, our guest here on 94 WIP. You got a guess as to who's going to be the play caller on this team? You're right. The head coach, who was an offensive coach, who was an OC, but not a play caller, hires a new OC who hasn't been doing all that long and wasn't the play caller out there in La La Land with the Chargers. I still want to say San Diego. Who's going to be calling the plays for the Birds this upcoming season?
Well, I think Nick's going to call the plays. I don't think there's any question about that. And typically when you have a coaching change, you have the pendulum theory in sports. It usually goes the other direction. But it's interesting because in this case, Indianapolis really set up their system the same way Doug and Frank had it here. So, Doug was the play caller. Frank was heavily involved with game planning out in Indy. Frank was the play caller, and Nick was heavily involved in game planning. And I expect, Nick to be the play caller here and Shane to be heavily involved in game planning. In other words, it's not the big shift. It's pretty much business as usual, just with different people doing it. So it's interesting. Usually you do have more of a tangible change of doing things when you make a change at head coach.
All right. I'll give you my thought process when the first rumor kicked in from a source that I trusted enough to go, damn, all right, this is the new Eagles head coach. My first thought was, all right, well, they think he's going to be the quarterback whisperer for Carson Wentz. And then I went on to other reasonings behind it and speculating in my own mind as to why they did what they did and wait for the reporting to come out. But sometimes the obvious answer is the answer you keep coming back to, and I keep coming back to this one. I don't think it's the only reason why they hired him, but I think it is the number one reason why they hired him, because they believe he's the guy who can fix Carson Wentz. I'm sure you went through the same exact thing in your thought process. Do you agree that it's the number one answer? Is it 95% of the reason why he's the new head coach of the Eagles? How much am I overstating that this is the reason why he has gotten the job?
Well, I got to tell you, I hope you're wrong. I hope that's not the reason he got the job. I mean, the enormity of the job as an NFL head coach is pretty daunting. And to put it down to one person who's coming off a historically bad season, I just think that would be a terrible way to go. I think the organization as a whole has to make the decision early. Are we going to try the reclamation project? Are we going to move on? And I think they got to make a concrete decision. Hopefully they learn from the drafting of Jalen Hurts, the old adage that if you got two quarterbacks, if you think you got two quarterbacks, you really don't have any quarterbacks. So I do think they have to make a decision.
All right. Well, John, I need to interrupt you here. Do you not believe that decision has already been made?
No, I don't think it's been made.
Really?
They haven't even talked. I think Nick has now talked to Carson Wentz. They hadn't talked to Jalen Hurts, never mind Carson Wentz, as this was going on, which is astonishing to me. It kind of tells you a little bit of the disarray going on behind the scenes. So they got to get their heads together. Now, remember, it's this time of year. There's nothing you can do. The league year doesn't start till March, and obviously we're probably not even going to have off-season work again in a physical standpoint. It's probably all going to be virtual. That's the way it's trending. But typically, I mean, you want to get on the same page as your quarterback, and maybe they were just waiting for the new head coach, and maybe that explains part of it. But then the second is, I mean, Nick was you know, he's a wide receiver at Mount Union. He was a receiving coach before he became a quarterback coach, then sort of jockeyed back and forth. I think he's more comfortable with receivers than anything else. So I don't think this is, you know, if you go back to the quarterback incubator in 2016, as they called it at the time, you know, Doug played the position for 13 years. Frank played the position for a very long time in this league as well. John DeFilippo played the position. I don't think you have that. So if that's why they hired Nick Sirianni, boy, I don't think it's going to work out. I will say that.
Fair enough. We're talking to John McMullen from SI and Philly Voice here with us on 94 WIP. I had a caller probably right before I punched up who said he thought that Deuce Staley was shortchanged by the Philadelphia Eagles or treated unfairly. I got no issue with either Deuce Staley moving on and wanted out of his contract, and the Eagles certainly gave him permission to do just that, and he landed immediately in Detroit. But I don't know what the Eagles could have done. If they weren't going to make Deuce Staley their head coach, which I don't believe they were going to, I think that you and I diverge a little bit here. I think the quarterback is a big part of their decision to hire Nick Sirianni, and I don't think they thought that Deuce was the guy who was best suited to fix Carson Wentz. I just don't think it was going to happen, so you're keeping him in the same position, running back, assistant head coach. He was passed over for head coach here. I think it was an untenable situation. I think it was a foregone conclusion that he had to look elsewhere, and I'm glad that he landed on his feet in Detroit. Did anyone do wrong here?
I don't know if you can say anyone did wrong, because I do believe at the end of the day, Jeffrey Lurie made a decision based on who he thought was the best person for the job of head coach of his football team. I think what complicates things is obviously the environment we're in, the league as a whole, the Rooney Rule. You've seen so many high-profile people in this league criticizing everyone for not looking at African-American candidates. The Eagles had a high-profile one on staff. And then Jeffrey Lurie kind of hurts himself because he kind of talks the talk often with this progressive political bent. And let's be honest, I mean, it's been over 2 decades since he's hired an African-American as a head coach or a coordinator. Nobody since Ray Rhodes. Now, Todd Bowles was here, but as an interim who wasn't hired for the defensive coordinator job. So I think that is the bigger issue in people's minds. But I will say that Jeffrey made what he thinks is the best decision and is often his worst enemy because he talks such a big game when it comes to minority hiring. And it comes down to, don't, do as I say, don't do as I do. That's how a lot of people look at Jeffrey Lurie right now.
And by the way, do you think Roger Goodell has been on the phone with McNair, the owner of the Texans, who are the only team left with a job opening, to say, you are hiring Eric Bieniemy, right? We kind of need this one. He's a viable candidate. I talked to him. I told you he's going to be a great coach. You need to take one for the team here. Do you think there's any arm twisting going on with the one job that's left open and no minorities have been hired so far in this go-around?
Well, one was, but Robert Saleh is technically a minority that would be under the Rooney Rule. But obviously, African Americans are 69% of this league, so that's what everybody is focused on. And there's been 0 hires from that standpoint in this cycle. And, I said it with the Eagles. Roger would not reach out and say that, But if someone called him and asked him for advice, he would have steered Jeffrey Lurie in that direction. He would definitely steer Houston in that direction. And, I don't think it's going to be the enemy, but it might be Leslie Frazier, so it might work out anyway.
Okay, we shall see. All right, one non-Eagle question before I let you run. What the hell was Matt LaFleur thinking, kicking a field goal with 2 minutes and change to go yesterday?
I got to tell you, and this talks about Nick Sirianni, and I just mentioned this on a different show, on a different station. This league's about personnel. This league's about talent. Because Matt LaFleur is one of the worst coaches in this league, and he's won 80% of his games because he's got the MVP playing quarterback, and they're just going to win a ton of games. But he makes some decisions, and people are going to focus on this week because it's the biggest stage.
Yeah.
But, I mean, this is a common occurrence. They're just better than everybody else typically, so it doesn't show up. Yeah, I mean, you go back to, I think Mike Lombardi, and I chuckled at this term, he called them subcontractors because, as a head coach, if he was a head coach, and you see your defensive coordinator in that type of situation playing, single high, man-to-man coverage, and all that could happen is a deep throw, and that's really where you can argue Tampa won the football game. That was a disastrous decision. So many. And yeah, I mean, they were the better football team. They certainly didn't play their A game. And that's kind of what happens when you have upsets. I mean, the better team's got to play poorly and the underdog's got to play great. And for the most part, that's what happened.
Brady was great in the first half. He did throw a couple picks in the second half, but when he needed a first down, which, oh, by the way, and again, I was on the air on CBS. My show started just as we got to the about 8-minute mark of the fourth quarter. When I first saw it, I said, there's no way they can call pass interference on that play. I watched the entire game, and the refs, to their credit, were letting them play. And I go, there's no way they're going to throw a pass interference flag. I saw the flag come out. I go, can't be. And then they gave you the one angle where you saw that his jersey was about a foot and a half removed from the back of his. The ref couldn't pass on that. He had to call it. He was forced to call it. Yeah. And I know that was a big part of it. But shockingly, Tom Brady got a first down when he needed a first down. How did the head coach of the Packers not think he was going to be able to do that? Yeah,
I mean, it is amazing. And to me, I think the more underreported thing, and Aaron Rodgers talked after the game, obviously, on third down, he didn't know if they were going to go on fourth down. Right. As a head coach in this league in that type of situation, you have to alert your quarterback whether you're going to kick it or not. He's got to know if he's got one down or two downs. I mean, that to me is worse than anything. And he had no idea. And that kind of tells you some of the issues they're dealing with. And by the way, one of the reasons he doesn't want to play for that organization, as amazing as that sounds, he doesn't want to play there after a 13-3 season, and really hasn't wanted to play there for years, at least 2 seasons, because he hasn't felt the organization as a whole has done what they needed to build around him. Now, a lot of quarterbacks, I joked about it, Deshaun Watson, Carson Wentz, more quarterbacks hate their organizations than don't, it seems, in the modern era, but it's amazing that you could be the MVP of this league. You can win whatever they won, 13 games, I think, and he doesn't want to be a part of it.
Well, at least the Detroit Lions parted ways.
Matt Stafford, another one.
Unhappy grounds with Matthew Stafford. And that just makes it tougher to trade Carson Wentz if they do go back down the road. John, as always, great stuff. Appreciate it whenever you come on. I may or may not be calling you next week. We'll see if anything significant happens between now and then. I'll probably get John just to talk about the Super Bowl more than anything else. Thanks for coming on with me this week.
All right, Jody. Appreciate it. Thanks.
John McMullen from Sports Illustrated, Cover the Birds, Philly Voice, day in and day out, is extending the Play podcast. Must listen for Eagle fans. All right, quick timeout. Come back. we will get the phones reopened. Hit me up, 215-592-9494. Got a newbie. Got a new guest joining us at midnight. Jeffrey Knox from InsideTheEagles.com. I think I founded somebody